My good friend Stephen Corey next to me, our featured poet for this two-day event. And some of my colleagues as well here, both are faculty members at JCC, Mr. James Beal, who teaches voice for us, and Mrs. Cathy Gagliano, who teaches piano for us and does a lot of playing piano and accompanying of people in performances. So yeah, very good. So we're here to talk today and to hear as well this collaborative project that Stephen and myself have created, which is a set of art songs. I should tell you a little bit about maybe art song. Art song is a genre of classical music. Actually, the first thing I should say is that we think of classical music sometimes as a bunch of dead composers, but nothing could be further from the truth. Classical music is alive and well today, and there are many, many composers worldwide who are writing it today for all different kinds of instruments and all different kinds of occasions, and it's still, is very much in abundance today. The music market, of course, is, if you turn on the radio, the music market is dominated by the popular music world today, because that is, what makes money. But classical music classical music doesn't exist so much for money making necessarily in most cases. So it's out there, definitely, and you can hear it if you know where to look. So you've come to the right place today. So a little bit about art song. Art song is a genre of classical song, okay? It has been around for more than 200 years. It especially became popular in the early 19th century, that's early 1800s, okay? And in those days, an art song was just a song for one singer and one piano player. And it still is that today, although today it can also be, many composers have done things with one singer and like a group of string players, or one singer and a chamber ensemble of different instruments. So it can be that too. But in its most traditional form, it's one singer and one piano player. And a composer that writes art songs approaches it usually not by writing the words themselves. Usually they will take pre-existing poems that were written by someone else, a poet, and they'll choose serious poetry, not just your average kind of song lyrics, but serious poetry, and usually poems that weren't intended originally to be set to music. But then they'll take those poems and set them to music and create a musical composition where the singer will sing the words of those poems and the piano will be used to add to that. So that's what it's about, and the style of the music, is usually a classical style, not a popular music style, so you don't have the kinds of repetitions that you would in a popular song where you have like a chorus, a section that keeps coming back with the same words, that kind of thing. It's not like that. And again, it's serious poetry, so usually, the poems that would, in fact, all the time, the poems that are used for art songs are, poems that comment and just ruminate about, profound, significant stuff in life, not just your everyday things. So that's what this is, this project. I took 4 of Dr. Corey's poems and put them together in a set. That's the other thing. Art songs are usually put together in sets. And some people call them song cycles, some people call them just sets of songs, so that's what I've done. I took 4 poems that weren't originally in a set, but then I put them together in a set. And usually when we do that, they're based around a common theme or they have something in common, and I can talk more about that later. Yeah, so there's 4 of them, like I mentioned. The title of the entire set is Lifted Far Past Daily Speech. I'll talk about that more soon. So that's a little bit about art song. How the project came about, actually, was interesting. This came about, about a year ago. We started talking about this. It came about because of this gentleman right here, James Beal, who has been a good friend of Dr. Corey's for a very long time. They went to school together here in Jamestown some years ago. And so Jim came to me one day and said, I have this poet friend, Steve Flory, and I'd like to bring him here, but I wonder what you would think. You know, he's talking to me, and he says, what would you think of creating a set of art songs based on his poetry, you know, and then I could sing them, you know, he's going to sing them for us today as well as tomorrow night at the concert. And I said, you know, that's very exciting to me because I love writing art songs. I've written several sets of art songs before, and I continue to write them as much as I can. Yeah, and then Steve and I had a chance to meet last summer, and we talked about the project, and, you know, we were both agreeable to it. And so then I started reading a lot of Steve's poetry. And I read and I read and I read, and I finally found 4 poems that really resonated with me, that really spoke to me, and that I felt, you know, would be very good for this project. And then, you know, I set about, you know, writing the music to them. So, so that's kind of how it began. Oh, I had to get Steve's permission too, by the way, of course. Whenever you set poems by a living poet, you always have to have either the permission of the poet or whoever holds the copyright on the poems. So I had to do that as well, and of course Steve graciously agreed. So yeah, so enough about that. Maybe we should talk about the actual poems and music and get on to that whole part. I wonder if, I'll hand it over to Steve here, who maybe will, you know, give us some stuff about the first poem.
James, I'm sitting here thinking things the two of us did in junior high and high school. Who'd have thought we'd have ended up here? I'm very grateful to Jim, who over the years has shown far more interest in my poetry than most of the world has. To be invited here to participate. So I'm your serious poet for the day. And we're ready to move on, aren't we, into the music? So I'll just, all right, so the thinking here is that there are 4 pieces, and I'll read one of them, and then something else will happen, and we'll go along in segments like that. This first piece is something that I had written, and I thought it was the beginning of a poem, and it sat around for a while. And it didn't get anything more added to it. And then, and it had no particular plan for itself. It wasn't about any particular person or thing. My father died in 1985, much too young. And suddenly, this thing that I thought was the beginning of a poem became for me a whole poem, and a poem that, although it says nothing about my father, became a poem that was for him. It has no title. 8 lines long. Even silence must have its rhythm and shape. The speech of the newly dead encompassing the room. Rolling the house. Rolling the house in a stomach-churning swell. Across the blackened fields of ice, beyond the black window.
So there's the poem. So now what was I to do with this musically? Well, the first thing I can tell you is that with art song, we always try to go to a deeper level, you know, than one often does with a popular song. So with art song, we try to really plumb the depths of, you know, what the poet is trying to say, what the poem means, and we try to use musical devices to get that across, and to depict images in the poem and meanings and things that are in the poem. And that's always been the case with art song. And there are many techniques. Composers often use the piano. For instance, there's a famous composer named Franz Schubert in the early 19th century, famous art song by Schubert called The Earl King. It's about a father riding through the forest at night on a horse, and he's got a sick child in his arms, and he's trying to get the child to medical attention. Anyway, the composer uses the piano to depict the hooves of the galloping horse with these very fast repeated octaves that are played in the piano. So that's one of many techniques. Another technique is called text painting, where you can have the singer do things that would depict certain things in the poem. For instance, if the poem talks about walking up a mountain, you could have the singer sing an ascending vocal line which goes up in range, right? So lots of different possibilities with that. So with this poem, with every poem, of course, I had to find, my interpretation. I had to really get into the poem myself and find what it meant to me, and then try to express that in music. Obviously, the poem is about the death of a loved one, which is always a very, difficult, painful experience, and it turns your world upside down. It really does. And to me, that line about rolling the house, that was the line. It rolls your house. It just turns your world upside down. When your father or a loved one dies, right? And it sends you careening into this wasteland, emotionally, the blackened fields of ice, right? So to me, that was very symbolic. And I wanted to express that idea of rolling the house musically. And what I came up with was the very first gesture of the piece, which is chaotic. It doesn't sound like normal music. It sounds unpleasant. And it's supposed to, because the poem is not about, your happy-go-lucky moments, right? So I'm just going to ask Cathy real quick before we actually hear the piece. Can you play the first couple of measures, Cathy? Very good. And so that for those first few gestures, that's rolling the house. To me, that's musically, that's what expresses that and paints that image musically. And you'll hear that come back throughout the song. Now in the middle section of the song where it talks about, in the middle section of the poem where it talks about the speech of the newly dead encompassing the room, that is the most intense part of the song. That's the part where it'll get the loudest. The singer will go into his higher range, and the music will get quite intense. And then towards the end, the vocal lines finally go down and down and down until they finally reach this low point where he sings, across the blackened fields of ice, beyond the black window. Descending lines in music have always been associated with sorrow or sadness or depression, so whenever we want to invoke those things, we often use lines that go down and especially reach a low point. Okay, so that's kind of, some of the things that you're going to hear here. And again, this music is maybe different than what you're used to hearing. Classical music has changed a lot over the years. But again, the piece is definitely turbulent, and it's not supposed to be, your pleasant kind of piece. We're going to hear, things will sort of resolve later in the set, but you have to wait a little bit for that. So I'll turn it over to Jim and Cathy now.
Silence in a stomach churning swell. Across the blackened fields of ice, beyond the black window.
Neil talking about the opening thing there, and I was thinking, geez, maybe I got some of that right when I was doing it. So I appreciated his take on my words. And the other thing, this is just curiosity information for you. I am hearing this for the first time as well. Poems come from anywhere. When my two older daughters were small, in the 70s, early 80s, there was a popular children's magazine called Ranger Rick. And I actually got two good poems out of looking at that magazine with my children. The other one, the one that's not involved here today, is rather grim. This one came from seeing a photograph of a woman lying on the ground in Mexico, her body entirely covered with monarch butterflies. Migration. To this small hill in Mexico comes every monarch butterfly alive. You can lie on the grass and be covered with hundreds of bright and weightless bodies. From a short distance off, you will appear as a shimmering black and orange angel burning against the hillside. You can think how the rest of the world is empty now of this beauty which buries you here. It will leave for 50 weeks, but will return in different bodies to this same place, and will light upon you if you are here. Can you refuse these rests, these hair-like legs brushing you until it seems they could lift your skin into the sky?
Every monarch butterfly alive, that's a lot, huh? You know? So yeah, to me, this poem is just exhilarating. To me, this is a joyful, exhilarating poem. I should tell you that I myself am a guy who really likes nature and, you know, who sees a lot of meaning in nature, and I enjoy being out in nature. So a poem like this about connecting with nature on that level, you know, it really spoke to me. So, so how would I create these, you know, hundreds, thousands of wings that are flapping constantly, all this activity, all these little wings, right? How would I create that in music? Well, I sat down at the piano and started to, you know, improvise, which is often how I start. And I discovered these little repeated figures that I could use that would suggest all these hundreds of butterflies. They're triplets. They're little groups of 3 notes that are repeated and changed and moved around on the piano. Maybe we can hear a little bit of those now at the beginning of the piece, Cathy. Yeah, so those are the butterflies, okay? All those little, constantly moving notes, right? And you're going to hear that just about throughout this piece, okay? The only part where you don't hear that, you guessed it, it's the part where he talks about you can think how the rest of the world is empty now, right? So in that section, you won't hear those little things because talking about how the rest of the world is empty now of these butterflies. But you can think how the rest of the world is empty now, but later on he says, but will return, right? So as soon as he says will return, they come back. All those repeated notes, all those little figures come back, okay? So that's very intentional, very intentionally placed. A couple other things I might mention. If you remember at the end, it talks about they could lift your skin into the sky, right? Well, of course, when he sings into the sky, you'll notice that is an ascending line. Into the sky, like this. And also at the end, at the very end, the piano takes all those little figures and just goes up and up and up and up and up into the highest part of its range. And that, of course, is also supposed to bring out this image of into the sky. Beyond that, again, I find it to be a very joyful, very exhilarating poem, and so, the harmonies that I used, it's much more pleasant than the first piece, for sure, and it's much more consonant, if you will, and much more joyful.
This beauty which buries you will return. In different bodies, to this same place, and will light upon you if you are here. Can you refuse these gifts? These hand-like legs brushing you until it seems they could lift your skin. Into the
I'll give you just a little listening hint here before we begin, since it's a little complicated. You just envision a patch of ground that is in the morning, that is on a sunny day. There are trees, and so a shadow. The trees cast a shadow on the sunny day on this spot. But on a day after it has rained, that same spot could be protected from the sun and remain wet. The poem is called Water Shadow, and it has a line, epigraph from the great Walt Whitman. We know not why or what, yet weave, forever weave. On a sunny day, it would be shadow, this needle-fine web of moisture near the pavement's edge, beneath the evergreens. But dew and later clouds made the pines protect the road today, not from glare, but from drying, leaving this lace of water as a fossil of the night. Though asphalt and earth ask nothing, I could bare my chest and lay it against this odd morning map. The deep weave of my veins would match the earth as if mirrored. A moment of dreams and regrets. The thoughts of a Siamese twin as the surgeon's knife comes down.
Okay, so completely different mood for this next poem, of course. So, you know, with each of these poems, whenever I set text to music, regardless of the poems, I always have to take time to really develop a relationship with the poem and you know, form my own interpretation of it, and you know, sort of get to the heart of it in my own mind in terms of what it means to me and what I, you know, really what I think it is saying. And to me, this is a very melancholy poem and a very contemplative poem, really contemplating some very profound things. One of which I think, to me, is this poem is about our connection with the earth and how in many ways we've lost that in our modern world, actually. So this is sort of the other side of the coin from migration. You know, migration is an exhilarating experience where we can connect with nature, but this is the other. For me, it's the other side of the coin about, you know, our lost connection to the earth and our lost connection to nature as we are surrounded by, you know, everything that we have in our modern world, and we seem to encroach upon nature more and more every year, you know. So yeah. So there's that. So the general mood of the music I wanted to make very melancholy, for sure. But again, I tried to use the piano to also symbolize something from the poem. This needle-fine web of moisture, you know, this wet spot on the ground, right? I love how he puts that, needle-fine web of moisture. And he also talks about weaving in the poem, as well as the Whitman quote talks about weaving. So I really tried to come up with a gesture in the piano that would sort of encapsulate those ideas. And the very first couple of gestures in the piece, to me, is that's what that was about. So Cathy, could you play just the beginning? Yeah, so very good. So that's the musical representation of that needle-fine web of moisture. You'll hear that come back throughout the piece. And in the sort of middle section of the piece, where it talks about, though asphalt and earth ask nothing, I could bare my chest and lay it upon this odd morning map. That part, I took that gesture actually and really tried to weave something with it, literally with music. I put together these sort of intertwining lines which would create something that sounded like weaving. So yeah, that's really what ties the piece together. And beyond that, of course, at the end when it talks about the surgeon's knife coming down, that's obviously going to be a descending line, definitely. So, okay, I think we're ready to hear it.
This needle-fine web of moisture near the pavement's edge, beneath the evergreens. But and later clouds made the pines protect the road. of a Siamese twin, as the surgeon's knife comes down.
If you have or have had small children, you will have a sense about the opening of this. You could even have a sense of it about yourself, I suppose. Music for my daughters. Beyond all our bounds of monotony, the child lies down each night to the same record on the tiny machine. Her drowsing and dreams evolving week after week from identical songs. She neither thinks of how she chose this theme, nor perceives she will sometime choose another, but knows she cannot sleep with silence. When the time comes suddenly for change, she leaves the old music without regret, with scarcely a thought of the shift, since the heart of her comfort, the voice lifted far past daily speech, remains.
So we have a child, a small child, who's listening to the same music every night as she goes to sleep, right? And then later on, when the time comes suddenly for change, as the poet says, she leaves the old music without regret. So then, life changes. She leaves that old music and continues on into life. So to me, there were two distinct parts of this poem. The first part is a lullaby. To me, a small child, listening to some soft music, going to sleep. So for the first part of the music, you're going to hear in the piano something that sounds very much like a lullaby, and the voice as well. And it's quite repetitious, identical songs. It's the same music every night, right? But then right at the point of the poem where it says, when the time comes suddenly for change, the music will change very abruptly, very dramatically, and it goes into a march. To me, that really, that last section of the poem represented, okay, the child is getting older, life is changing, you march into the next phase of your life, right? That's why I felt a march was appropriate. However, the old music, she leaves the old music without regret, but it remains, the heart of her comfort, that music which comforted her through her childhood remains. It's become a part of her, right? So at the very end of the piece, you're going to hear the theme, the piano lullaby, repetitious idea from the beginning will come back at the end, only it will still be a march. You'll hear a very quiet march. So the right hand of the piano will play this dee-da-da, da-da-da, that's the thing from the beginning, which is the old music, the lullaby, but it's combined with the left hand that still plays this march idea. So yeah, that's kind of what I chose to do with the music. To me, it's really about, this poem isn't just about, music, it's about the love of family. The love of family, as we're children. And, even though our life changes, we go into adulthood, the love of family remains with us. It's become a part of us, right? And it sustains us through everything, and it takes us and it protects us and keeps us, keeps us whole through our lives, right? So this is sort of the other side of the coin from the first song. The first song we heard about the death of a loved one and how that can just tear you apart, right? But now we're, sort of being put back together again by the love of family. So this piece is very gentle in some ways and very, very joyful and very positive. And I wanted to end, I didn't want to end with, I wanted to end with a beginning in a way. To me, this piece is a beginning. It's the love of family that holds you and keeps you at the beginning of your life and then sustains you as you get older, right? So even though the love of family, opens us up to the pain of losing a loved one, that's the first song, right? The love of family also sustains us, and ultimately, that love of family even, sustains the bond between us even beyond death, right? Even through death and beyond it, right? So that's sort of why I wanted to put this at the end. Before we hear it, I'll just say one other thing. The title of the entire set, which I chose, is basically the last line of this poem, "Lifted far past daily speech." I chose that because I felt like that phrase, for me, encompassed the meaning of all of these poems. All of these poems have to do with something that is far more than the everyday. It's not just your everyday experience. It's something that stays with you. So the death of a loved one, or going to a hill in Mexico where you experience this amazing thing with nature, right? Or contemplations of our connection to the earth, our lost connection, or the love of family, right? All of these things are much more than your mundane everyday thing, right? They are lifted far past our daily speech. They become something. They become part of us. They become much more than just the everyday. So I felt like that phrase really summed it all up and tied all the pieces together. And that's why I chose these 4 in a set. So, okay, I think we're ready.
when I write things, my first hope and assumption is that the work is going to be seen by somebody who picks up a magazine or a book and is confronting the words that I put on the page on his or her own, you know, according to reading ability and ear for paying attention to the sounds of what I'm doing, and with mind and emotion for considering what's going on in it. Of course, I would always like people also to be able to hear the words aloud. Of course, the best thing would be if they get so excited by something that they read silently that they jump up and read it to themselves, or read it to somebody else, or get somebody else to read it to them. This situation here, you know, is different and unusual for me. Obviously, you present things in a different venue that would be taken somewhat differently. Given the general tenor of all manner of live presentations that go on in the world these days, I would say this one is probably fairly sedate. But I want to think that the best of any work, whether it's a piece of music or a piece of writing, will have its impact on people, no matter where they encounter it.